Welcome, everybody. This is our 6th webinar in our series. We'll have one next week. We'll have the times up. We're lucky to have our guest tonight, Dr. Kieran Dalton, who's a sports psychologist, and he's going to address a lot of the issues that you parents may have and also players may have. So as you're listening to the webinar, if you have questions, just get them in there and we'll answer them at the end. Okay? So obviously, he has a BA in special education, a master's degree in general education, and a doctorate in clinical psychology. He specializes in sports psychology. But in addition, Dr. Dalton played soccer at Strathaven High School, where he was all Delco his junior and senior year. He's a member of the Millersville Sports Hall of Fame. A prolific scorer, he scored 43 goals in his 4 years and was selected to the All-PSAC team for 3 years, as well as All-Mid-Atlantic as a senior. After graduation, Kieran played professionally in Ireland. So he has a great background to understand soccer players. Next. Okay. For me, the effects of COVID-19, myself, I find myself angry at times, unsatisfied, bored. The fact that I don't see my family or my friends is bothersome. So I was wondering, how has the pandemic affected young athletes who have missed their regular routines in school and with sports and academics? Kieran?
Well, it's affected everyone greatly. I mean, we all know that. I think when this all started about a year ago, it was a little bit different because we thought it might be temporary. We didn't know how long it was going to go on. There was actually a really interesting study that was done where they surveyed like 3,000 families and looked at the rates of depression and anxiety in the kids in those families. And they did that in April when COVID really started to become real. And then they did it again in July. And the surprising thing was the rates of anxiety and depression didn't go up significantly. So I think that's one thing that we all have to remind ourselves of, is how resilient people are in general, but kids are as well. The only thing that I'd question there is July was a long time ago. And I do think that I've seen it in my private practice work. I think a lot of people are really experiencing the full effect of COVID fatigue. And I think that athletes are kind of in the front of that. Because if you're an athlete, the most important thing to you, which is sports, has been either completely taken away or drastically altered. And that's a really hard thing to experience. I compare it to a lot of the athletes, whether it's club level, high school, college, who experience a significant injury. Let's say they tear their ACL. A lot of those athletes that I work with will actually go into a bit of a depression because sports is taken away from them. Another way to look at it is athletes tend to have big parts of their identity, their social life, their family life. They may do something outside of sports, but then there's sports. And a lot of the audience members I'm talking to right now, sports is the most important part of their identity. And when it's taken away, it can have a really negative effect on them emotionally, cognitively, behaviorally. And that's a lot of the stuff that I'm helping kids deal with right now.
So what would be the indicators that a young athlete is suffering from depression?
The best thing that any parent that I talk to that has questions about that, you're looking for major changes in certain things. I mean, the common symptoms of both anxiety and depression are you'd be looking for, number one, major changes in mood. That's the obvious. You're going to see them be a little more withdrawn, isolated. But one thing that parents don't look for in mood, we usually think about when it comes to depression, the adult form of depression, crying, really sad. With kids, it tends to look more like anger and irritability. And so you're looking for an increase. So if you have a pretty easygoing kid and all of a sudden you're seeing all this anger and irritability, what's really going on is their emotions have been kind of turned on their head and they're dealing with that so much, and therefore their capacity to deal with small minor things around the house in soccer or whatever it is has really been compromised. So you're looking at that. You're also looking for major changes in things like appetite and sleep. You'll see kids eating more or eating less. You'll see kids, and more if it's anxiety, they're having a real hard time getting to sleep, staying to sleep, getting up in the middle of the night, stuff like that. Or if it's maybe more depression, you'll see teenage kids sleeping a lot more, because the reality is sleeping is, a way to avoid feeling that way. So those are some of the big things that you start to look for when you think about anxiety and depression. And the other thing that is really a telltale sign is motivation. If you've had a kid if your son or daughter is super motivated with soccer, and all of a sudden they're starting to lose interest, they don't want to train on their own, they don't want to go to practice. Now, you do have to be careful, because, kids go through ups and downs in motivation, but if it seems really out of character for them, there might be something going on there.
Sounds good. Next slide, please. Okay, we sent our players, all our ODP players, a 6-week fitness program. But how difficult is it for a player to train alone and follow a schedule if he's just working by himself or she's working by himself?
It's really hard, but I would encourage everyone to Google. Bill Bestwick was the sports psychologist who worked for Manchester United back when they were the best team around. And if you just Google Bill Bestwick, Roy Keane Warrior, it's just a short 2-minute clip where he's describing kind of the mindset of Roy Keane, who was the central midfielder for United in the 90s. But one of the messages in that short clip is, the athlete is the mind. The body is what does the work, but the athlete's the mind. The mind is what starts everything. So it's your thinking, it's your decision-making, even before you decide to train or not to train, that influences everything. So what we've experienced is coaching at Swarthmore College. I've talked to my guys a lot. When we had our season taken away last year, there was a time in the summer when our guys weren't sure. And so they were getting ready for a season. And I was constantly encouraging them to monitor their thinking. Because if their thinking goes in the direction of, well, we're not even going to play, this season's going to be canceled, or if you guys are thinking the next tournament's not even going to happen, if you start letting that thinking creep in your head and take over, well, then all of a sudden you're going to lose motivation. You're going to think, well, what's the point? So you really have to pay attention to those thoughts. So my guys at Swarthmore College, I was constantly telling them, you have to believe that we're playing. I know you're going to question, but you have to act like we're playing, because you have two options. You either take your foot off the gas now, and let's say we're surprised and we start playing and you're not fit, well, you're going to find yourself on the bench or you're going to get cut. Or you work really hard now and you prepare like we're having a season. The worst thing that can happen is you worked really hard and we don't have a season. And guess what? That's discipline. You're creating discipline. And so what I encourage all athletes to do is really pay attention to that thinking. And another thing is, training on your own is boring. It's not as exciting as training with your teammates and all that kind of stuff. But one way to reframe it in your head is, if you're going to be able to work really hard now when everybody's supposed to be training on their own, well, again, you're creating that discipline. And not everybody's working that hard right now. So you might be gaining an advantage where everybody might be plateauing a little bit, or their skill might be dropping during this time. If you're working really hard, you're going upward. And when we get back to full schedule, real soccer, you're going to be ahead of everybody else. So that also, if you work hard during this time when the future is uncertain, you're also going to, in addition to build discipline, you're going to feel more confident to be one of those players that continues to push yourself when everybody else kind of eases up a little bit.
That sounds great. Now, I was wondering, how important is feedback from parents and coaches? And is their feedback have negative consequences sometimes?
No, absolutely. But it really does depend. It all depends on how it's delivered. And so Now, the story that I'll tell any parent that'll listen, there were two baseball coaches, collegiate coaches in the Pacific Northwest, and they had 25, 50 years of experience of coaching. And they did this research and they found out that the worst, most athletes, when they did this study, most athletes said the worst part of their career was a car ride home. A lot of parents have seen this article, but the reason being is we tend to, if a kid plays poorly, we tend to dogpile on them, tell them all the things they did wrong. And the reality is our athletes are smart enough. They're self-reflecting. They don't need us to do that. So, my son is 10 years old. He's playing soccer now, and we have a standard routine when we're driving home in our Subaru. And the routine is this: for the first 5 minutes of the the first thing we do is I say, do you want to talk about it? And if his answer is no, okay, I'm not saying a word. If he doesn't want to talk about it, no matter what I say, and I'm a collegiate coach, I play professionally, he's not going to listen to it, or it's going to make matters worse. So if he says, I don't want to talk about it, fair enough. I'm going to respect that. If I have something that's really important because I know the game, I'll say, that's fine. I'll respect it, Jack. We'll talk about it later. And that always works. If he says, yeah, I want to talk about it, the first 5 minutes is very simple. I say, what did you do wrong? What do you think you can improve upon? And there's no judgment there. And he'll point out one or two things. I'm like, okay, I agree. How are you going to fix that? And, he's like, well, I got to work on my fitness, or I got to improve my left foot, or I've got to communicate more. Great. We come up with a couple strategies, and then we're done with the conversation. It's problem solving. What was wrong? How are we going to fix it? Great. Because the athlete's mind is going to obsess over that negative stuff. And I'm trying to help him and all my clients not do that, because that's a recipe for anxiety and low confidence. And then on the flip side, for the next 20, 25 minutes, all we do is talk about the good stuff. The great moves, the goal scored, the perfect pass, that great tackle, is communication. We talk about that stuff over and over again. And so that's specifically for parents, but it also works with coaches. And so to give the feedback for what they're not doing well in a very unemotional way is how it should be done. Because coach, you're teaching them. You need to give them that corrective feedback, but it shouldn't be done in a way that's angry or punishing. They're punishing themselves enough. And then shine the brightest light on the success. And one thing all coaches, and we've been doing at Swarthmore for a while now, is we shine the brightest light on hard work. Because listen, technique's going to fail you from time to time. You're going to have an off day. You might make a bad decision or two. But one thing you always have control over is your effort and your work rate. And so if we can shine the bright light on that, we're going to win a lot more games than we lose.
It's interesting. When I first started coaching, I hope you know this guy. I listened to Dennis Waitley. He was a sports psychologist on a cassette a long time ago.
You're old.
I know I am. And he emphasized building confidence and ways of building confidence and how important thinking positive is to the player. Could you just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. And for those of you in the audience, I know this about Mike because when I played for him at Strathaven, he referenced this guy before. And so confidence is the main reason any athlete comes to see me or any sports psychologist. They want to build their confidence. They know they're at an elite level and their performance is dropped. Why? Usually because confidence is low and anxiety is high. And so real quickly, there are these negative ways our brain works, and they're called cognitive distortions. There are 3 of them that really plague athletes. Number 1 is negative self-talk. Most athletes engage in negative self-talk. I suck, I'm no good, all that kind of stuff. And the main reason is they think it'll motivate them. And then I challenge that. Well, what if I followed you around for the next month and just talk trash all the time, every time you're on a soccer field? Would that motivate you? The answer is no. You would lose motivation. You wouldn't enjoy the experience anymore. So get rid of negative self-talk. It's not helping you. The other one is catastrophic predictions, thinking worst case scenario. Okay, well, if I think worst case scenario that I'm going to get cut, that I'm going to lose my starting spot, that I'm going to miss an open net, I'll be more prepared for it if it does happen. No, you're actually increasing the likelihood that it will in fact happen, because if you're thinking worst case scenario all the time, you're going to get really anxious, and that's when we make our most mistakes. Get rid of worst case scenario thinking. You can do it in small doses because, yeah, it's okay to be prepared, but real small doses. And the last one, especially for the teenage athletes and my college athletes, because your brain's in a state where you're so focused on everybody else, it's called inaccurate mind reading. It's when you're thinking everybody's constantly negatively judging you. They think the worst of you. And so you got to try and eliminate that kind of thinking. And so again, I talked about shining a bright light on hard work. The reason the conversations with Jack and I on the car ride home are 5 minutes of what needs to be fixed, 20 to 25 minutes of what you did well, because I want to bring his anxiety down and I want him to feel confident the next time he goes on the field. So my advice to you is, number one, just pay attention to your thinking. And if you're falling into those traps of what I said with negative self-talk, worst case scenario thinking everyone thinks you're terrible, start changing that, start working on it so that, yeah, you should identify your mistakes, but you don't have to beat yourself up for it. Point out your mistakes, figure out a way to fix them, do the work to fix them, and move on from it.
I think coaches contribute to that negative thought sometimes in their comments during games or after games. I remember Waitley telling a story about a manager going out to a pitcher's mound and telling the pitcher, whatever you do, don't get the outside of the plate. That's where he goes. So he has it in the back of his head, don't go to the outside of the plate, don't go to the out, and he pitches it right down the outside of the plate. It's home run. So those little negative thoughts really affect your performance.
I mean, there was a great study done with soccer players. They had, high-level soccer players, 500 of them, divided them up in half randomly, and they did penalty shots. And half the group was told, okay, in your head, tell yourself, don't miss, don't miss, don't miss. And the other half was told to say something like, you got this, you're going to make that, all that kind of stuff. And the group that was told, don't miss, don't miss, don't miss, they were more likely to miss because that seed has been planted in their head. So they start visualizing, shooting it wide over the crossbar, goalie making a save. And so, yeah, coaches do need to be aware of it. And here's the thing, I've been at Swarthmore for 18 years. I think I may have had one or two players, and they were both goalies, who said they needed the coach to rip them apart and get on top of them. The rest of that, no, that doesn't help me. If something's wrong, pull me aside, have a conversation with me. You don't need to embarrass me in front of everyone. Tell me what I'm doing wrong and how to fix it, and then I'll go back to playing. I think that's a more effective approach.
No, I like that example. It's better than the baseball analogy I just used, I think. Anyway, next slide. So how can a player curb fear or anxiety in training and games? And what do you look for in players to recognize anxiety? And what are methods to cope and enjoy playing?
Well, it ties in nicely to what I just said with that negative thinking, because that negative thinking, high-level athletes are supposed to have a level of anxiety. So if you think of anxiety as 1 being basically no anxiety, 10 being you're on the verge of a panic attack, you're going to throw up on the sideline before a game. When you get into that kind of 7, 8, 9 range of anxiety, that's when it starts to affect your performance. And the reason being is when you get anxious, it's a fight or flight response. Your heart rate starts beating too much, your blood pressure goes up, your muscles tense up. And when that happens, your first touch is going to be horrendous. But the other thing it does, it causes you to be a tentative, scared player. If you're really nervous and thinking all that anxious stuff and that negative stuff, you don't want the ball anymore. And so you kind of, you play scared. And when you play scared, you're not going to be very effective. So again, back to my main point when I talk to athletes is the first step in becoming a mentally tough athlete is paying attention to your thinking. And then once you start to pay attention to your thinking, you start to realize that negative stuff is going on, you have to challenge it. I mean, the audience is ODP players, right, Mike?
Right.
So the reality is you guys are high-level athletes. You guys are really good. And so, thinking and reminding yourself and reliving the best moments you have on the field is a real good way to boost your confidence and lower anxiety. Another way to think about it is, as human beings, negative experiences are like Velcro for our brain. They get stuck there and we relive them over and over again. Positive experiences are like Teflon. They slide right off. You want to reverse that process. Again, the negative experiences, the failure is normal. Another part of what Mike just asked with building confidence, coping with anxiety, is learning how to fail the right way. Now, Swarthmore College, last time we were playing, we made it to the Sweet 16 of the NCAA tournament. Most of our players, they're making more mistakes and having successes, and they're high-level college players, but they've learned how to fail the right way. When you fail, identify it. That's important. We learn from our failure, figure out a way not to let that happen again and move on. But when you succeed, sit with it, relive it. One thing that I have a lot of my athletes do is visualize and relive best experiences on the field, scoring the hat trick, having a shutout, shutting down the best player on the other team and man marking. Think about those experiences a lot more than the failure, and that's going to help you be less anxious the next time you step foot on the field and be more confident. And to kind of wrap this point up, if my main goal as a sports psychologist, and it may sound silly because I'm working with high-level athletes, is have them have fun on the field again. Because if I can get them to a point where they're having fun again, it means their confidence is really high and their anxiety is low. And as a result, they're playing well. And when we're playing well, that's when when we're at our best, that's when it's most fun. And, the term is called being in the zone. Sports psychologists call it experiencing flow. That's when we're not distracted by the external noise in our head. We're in the moment, we're playing at our best, and that's why we do it.
Next slide, please. Okay, there are players who don't demonstrate anxiety on the field, but they come onto the field with a sense of low self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
It might come from his family life, her family life, or in school. So how can you get a player to believe that they can be successful every time they step on the field?
Well, belief is an area of conversation that's come up a lot in my therapy office recently, because a lot of times parents will say to me, they'll say, Kieran, my son or daughter's been working with you for a little bit, and it shows. They're back to their old self. They're playing at a high level. They're having fun again. And they're like, but my question is, I was kind of saying a lot of the same stuff you've been talking about in therapy with my son or daughter. Why is it that your words carry so much more weight? And it's a very simple answer. Your mom and dad, you have a different type of relationship. When you praise them, unfortunately for a lot of athletes, when it comes from a parent, it's in one ear, out the other, because, well, your mom and dad, you're supposed to tell me good things about myself. But when the message comes from me, a trained clinical psychologist and sports psychologist, it carries more weight. And so I'm not telling parents not to praise. Always praise. It has to be genuine. It has to be, deserved. It's kind of like, I'm against participation trophies. I think they're silly, but they're also a problem, because guess what? If you're giving a trophy to everybody, and research has shown this, the kids who get the trophy who don't deserve it, it actually does more damage, because they feel worse about themselves. Like, I didn't earn this. Why are you giving this to me? And so the praise has to be authentic, because if all you're doing, and let's say your kid plays terribly and you tell them they're the best kid on the field, your praise isn't going to matter anymore, because they know you're not telling them the truth. So it has to be true. And the other thing is the negative stuff obviously hurts their self-esteem. Our kids are smart enough. They're self-reflecting enough. They don't need us to tell them that they played terribly and they're going to be benched the next game. It's okay when they're ready, when the kind of sting of a bad game's worn off, to have a conversation if you want to give them feedback. But again, it should not be emotional. It should not be talking down to them at all. And it's another important message in terms of self-esteem from the coaches, because the coach's words sometimes will carry more weight than the parents' words, because the coaches are the experts. And so again, coaches need to be aware. Your teachers, okay? Yes, you are motivators, but you're not going to motivate someone, when you're putting them down constantly. So
great advice, Kieran. Next slide. Some psychologists and coaches believe mental training is almost as important as physical training. Is this the case?
It depends on the age. Younger age physical training, obviously, because they're new to the game. They should be introduced to some kind of mental training, but physical is more important. But what you see as players get older is at a young age, you can tell the difference between on a team, the elite players and the players who aren't doing so well. There's a big gap. But as you get higher and higher, better teams, ODP, college level, the gap's minuscule between the best and the worst. And that's where the mental side really is the deciding factor. And so if you're the type of athlete who has ambitions to play at really high levels collegiately, you really need to consider looking at some of the mental stuff that's out there to prepare yourself for what to expect. Because if you step foot on a college field in preseason, everybody's going to be big, strong, fast, technical. They're going to know the game. You don't step foot on a preseason field in college without that. And so if you have this mental edge over everybody else, you're going to set yourself apart, because when you fail, you'll bounce back quicker. You'll be more confident more often. You'll be more resilient. You'll be more disciplined. And for me, the best mental training out there is mindfulness and meditation. It's pretty straightforward and simple, but it is really hard to do. And athletes understand it, because athletes know the process of practicing something over and over again to get good at it, whether it's your left foot, your defensive technique, distribution. Mindfulness is the same thing, but it's for your head. And the easiest way to put it is you focus on one thing. So for a lot of my athletes, it's close your eyes, comfortable position, listen to a song. And as you're listening to that song, you want to focus all of your attention on it. But what's going to happen early on? Your mind gets hijacked. It wanders. And it'll wander to negative stuff most likely. And so what you want to do is, as your mind wanders and you realize it's wandered, bring it back to the music. And you do this over and over again. So that wandering mind goes away from the music for shorter and shorter periods of time. And you recognize right away when it happens. So let's say I was a forward. I miss an open net in the first 5 minutes. My mind goes to all that bad stuff and it lasts for the rest of the game. I play terribly. Versus if I did the mindfulness enough, I miss that open net. My mind goes to a bad place for maybe 30 seconds. I catch that thinking. I got to get back focused on the game, and I get back to playing.
Sounds good. Next slide. Okay. In your practice, what are some of the outside pressures players bring out, and how can parents relieve the pressure for their son or daughter?
One of the biggest outside pressures for my athletes who haven't reached the college level yet is the thought of getting a scholarship, playing at the college level. And the reality is, if scholarship's your main goal, good luck. There aren't a ton out there. And I'm not telling you not to pursue it. The cost of tuition is crazy and it would be great. But if that's the main focus, you're ultimately taking the fun out of the game. It turns into a job. Because if your son or daughter is scholarship material, you don't want them focused on it. You want them focused on the game, because if they're focused on the scholarship, it's a distraction and it's too much pressure. And so you have that form of pressure. Another real big form of pressure is from teammates. Teammates are a big source of pressure because they can be negative, they can talk trash, they can talk behind one another's back. And I really encourage coaches to be finely attuned to that, because it can tear a team apart. One of the things we've done at Swarthmore College over the past probably 4 or 5 years, we struggled 6 years ago. And 4 or 5 years ago, Eric Wagner and I said, we've got to change the culture of the team. It's not working. And we did a whole bunch of things to fix the culture and the program. And one of the things we did, we created this brotherhood, this family-like atmosphere where the players love each other, the coaches and players love one another. It's one of these things where you just want to support and pick everybody up. And it's a real hard thing to do with your teammates, because in one sense, you're battling with them, but in another sense, you're battling against them for playing time and stuff like that. And so if coaches really aren't attuned to that kind of infighting and bickering and talking behind each other's back can have a really negative effect, not only on the whole team, but the individuals. And that pressure becomes a big problem.
That's good. How about players who decide that they want to specialize in one sport? What are the disadvantages of just playing one sport, especially at a younger age?
So when you specialize at a young age, the term's called the professionalization of youth sports. And so there has been research done on it, and it can be really problematic. And I'm not saying it's not for everybody. I kind of specialize in soccer at a young age. I played a lot of sports in elementary school, and that's what you're supposed to. But you can do it, and it can be okay. The problem is it's not for everyone. And what it can do, the two biggest negative impacts are sport-specific injuries, soccer players, knees, ankles, hips. Because if you're playing one sport all year round, it can do damage to the body. But the other thing that it can do, it can lead to burnout. We've had guys at Swarthmore College who were some of our best players, and they quit after their sophomore and junior year because they're not in love with the game anymore. It became a job. And so the research shows that at a young age, kids should play everything. It serves two purposes. Number one, it helps them figure out A, what they're good at, and B, what they like. And so they do that. And then, around 11, 12 years old, if you find you have a real passion for one or two sports, you play those 2 or 3 sports, you get into that. And then if you make that decision that I want soccer to be, I want to play collegiately, I want to keep this thing going as far as possible at 13, 14, 15. Yeah, then you can specialize in one sport and really go after it. Urban Meyer, the collegiate football coach, won national championships at Ohio and Florida. He's now coaching for the Jacksonville Jaguars. One of the things he did with recruiting was he intentionally looked for multi-sport athletes because he said these athletes who play other sports bring a different dimension. We've had guys at Swarthmore College who have been lacrosse players, and we love them because they bring a different type of toughness because lacrosse is a little more of a physical sport. So, you have to be mindful of that.
Real quick, Kieran, I'm getting a little short on time.
Yep.
What about a serious injury? How should a player handle that?
It's become a bigger part of my practice, and you have to acknowledge that it's devastating. Your sport's been taken away, you're sidelined, you're not active anymore. It can cause players to slip into depression. I've worked with them. And one way to really avoid that is to frame it in your head and find that silver lining. I know it's really hard to do, but the silver lining for a lot of athletes is this. If you can work through this injury, you have the surgery, you do the PT, you get in the gym, you fight through that lack of motivation and the pain. If you're able to do that, you are creating mental toughness. And that's the advantage. Yeah, you'll be a little bit rusty, but once you get back at, if you've worked hard enough, you'll be fine after a short period of time, and you'll be way more mentally tough than a lot of the other athletes, because that's what adversity, if we handle it the right way, does to us. It toughens us up.
No, I understand. Next slide. I just want to remind people that if you want to get in touch with Dr. Dalton, his email address is cdalton, CDALTAN, psychology.com, and his office number is 610-500-4656. Any questions?
Dalton's DALTON. Come on, Mike, you should know that.
I've done this all ever since I've known you. It's sad.
Okay.
All right, so if you guys have questions, please go ahead and go into the Q&A tool and type them in. I think we have what's meant to be kind of a funny one. And it says, did Mike Barr ever explain why he played you at wing mid when you were clearly a goal scorer? And this question is from Anthony from Delco.
He didn't have to explain it to me. All right, very quickly. The player who played on the left wing before I got there was a guy by the name of Brian Weir, who was a great winger. That's what he was. And we were the same type of player physically. Short, quick, could run for days, could play a little bit of defense, but could attack. And he saw that in me. Problem was that wasn't me as a player. Luckily, by the time my senior year rolled around, he gave me an opportunity to play up top, and I stayed there.
Great question.
So again, guys, if you have questions, go ahead and type them in. I guess everyone's being a little bit shy tonight.
Don't take any more questions from Anthony from Delco. That's his only question.
So I'll ask a question while we wait to see if anyone else jumps in here. What types of issues do you see the most in the college game, like from your players, as far as like, is it anxiety? Is it depression? What do you see as the biggest issue for a college athlete?
It's definitely anxiety, because the reality is, college sports elicit anxiety from us. I mean, for a lot of the athletes who get to that level, it is the goal. It's what they've wanted for their entire life. And once they finally get there, they initially feel this sense of relief. It's like, okay, I've done it. But then the reality sets in of, oh, wow, I thought I did all the hard work. Now I've really got to do the hard work. And so anxiety is a real issue for college athletes. And unfortunately, especially for the male athletes, they're bottling it up. It's not okay to talk about it. The good thing is the negative stigma of mental health is starting to break down a little bit. Kevin Love, the professional basketball player, talks about his panic attacks, and he's playing in the NBA. And so I think that's a good thing. But the problem is, when we don't talk about it, when we don't acknowledge, it festers, and it finds other ways out. It affects our sleep. We don't play as well on the field. We're cranky and irritable. We can't focus in class. So anxiety is the biggest issue. And I really think that talking about it is the first step to undoing it.
Thanks. You have any more, Bree?
Yeah, so there's another one on here. It says, how do we get involved in this type of major to study? So I guess they're asking, what was your educational path to getting to where you are now?
This is good.
Well, so unfortunately, there aren't a whole lot of sports psychology programs out there. I would imagine that'll change in the next couple of years. My path was definitely a non-traditional one. I went to Millersville. I was a special education major. I taught an emotional support classroom for second and third graders for 8 years. Now I'm the behavior specialist at the district as well. I got my master's in education. And then at that point, I realized I did like learning. I loved the psychology part of the students that I was working with. And so that's when I went to get my doctorate in clinical psychology. And then what really allowed me to kind of go into the sports psychology realm, in addition to my experience as a player and a coach, was the fact that I wrote my dissertation on mental toughness in sports. And my advice to anyone, because I truly feel this job's amazing. I get to talk sports and psychology, two things that are fascinating all day long. But my advice is, if you want to go as far as the doctorate, if you feel like you're passionate about it, absolutely, it's completely worth it. But you really have to know that you want to do that, because it's a lot of work. I mean, I was in my doctoral program for almost 7 years and working full time, and but it completely worth it.
Yeah, that was a great question. Great answer. So I think that's actually all of our questions for tonight. I'm guessing some people are excited to watch the U.S. women's national team. So they're excited to get over to that. But thank you so much for joining us tonight and answering these questions and giving us some great advice and some thoughtful things to think about.
Great job, Dr. Dalton.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll get this out to you along with his information if you have any further questions. Thanks, guys.
Okay. See ya.